Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 869th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the distinct pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between Pedro Reyes and José Falconi. We're thrilled to welcome poet Pierre Joris here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. Here in New York, we're on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land that we're speaking from. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Pedro Reyes studied architecture, but considers himself a sculptor. His works integrate elements of theater, psychology, and activism, and take on a variety of forms, from penetrable sculptures to puppet productions. Recently, Reyes was commissioned by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists together with the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons to raise awareness on the growing risk of nuclear conflict, for which he developed Atomic Amnesia, presented in Times Square in 2022. For his work on disarmament, Reyes received the Luxembourg Peace Prize in 2021. And our host today, Assistant Professor of Art and Human Rights at the University of Connecticut, José Falconi, received his PhD from Harvard University in 2010. From 2001 to 2011, he was Art Forum Curator at the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies at Harvard University, curating more than 30 shows of cutting-edge Latino and Latin American artists. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jose.
Thank you very much, Chloe, and thank you very much, everyone at the Rail. It's always a pleasure being here with all of you, and it's even a more distinct pleasure for me to be doing this with a friend who I think doesn't need any sort of introduction for anyone who works in Latin American art or in general in international contemporary art. Pedro Reyes, who I had this, we are friends for, I don't know, I guess it's too long, to say how long. I mean, we know each other, but I have been following his work, and we produced a book together in 2017 of his almost at that time 20 years of practice. So it is really, really great to reconnect with Pedro. What we are going to be talking and we're going to be addressing is his latest show, in Los Angeles. And then we are going to see also what else he's doing, because Pedro does a lot of things at the same time, and a lot of great things at the same time. So with that, Chloe, can you pass us put the PowerPoint that we have while Pedro introduces himself and says maybe something about this incredible show. Maybe, Pedro, you're going to start by telling us the title of the show, when it is running. I think it's in Los Angeles, and what is this about? What the show is about?
Jose, thank you for the introduction, and also Chloe. Answering your question, the show doesn't have a title per se, but it's. I have done a number of shows with Lison, and this may be kind of within the development of sculptural work that I've been doing in my studio. Is all works from the last year, and it's mainly two kinds of pieces. One are stone carvings, and the other are drawings that I made on amate paper. And a lot of these stone carvings are some done in basalt, which is this volcanic stone that you see there, and some other pieces made in marble. The one that you're seeing here right now, it's called détente, which is, as you know, this concept of not a truce, but a stop in the escalation of conflict, no? A voluntary pause that is, it's because, like these pieces at the same time, a hand and a dove, like the open hand has been a motif that sometimes have appeared in, for instance, like the monument to the open hand, Le Corbusier made in Chandigarh, or Niemeyer had made another open hand. Like hands have appeared in my sculpture in different forms, and depending on the position of the hand, you can get like a different reading. No, it's like there's like a very long tradition in art about like what is the vocabulary of hands. So I wanted to do a sort of morph between a hand and a dove, which is, like a maybe, I don't know, like a very mid-century concept, like the kind of a hand as a symbol of peace. But I often gravitate to these kind of themes that some people may consider cliches, but that still, I'm interested in this kind of idea of humanism. And this is another example of hands, which is called the treaty, and this is like a big carving in stone, which also is like, I don't know, nearly 3 meters high, and both these works are kind of connected with something that I hope that we will talk later, which is the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which will be presented in the United Nations in November. And perhaps, a lot of people don't know this, but Mexico has been a very strong advocate for the prohibition of nuclear weapons since more than 50 years ago. So we will go get back to that.
But tell us a little bit more about these sculptures, because these are like, we will talk about the nuclear proliferation later a little bit in our talk, but maybe we can discuss a little bit about the grammar and the vocabulary and the visual vocabulary that these sculptures come from, because they're like, as you say, they are to some degree they're capable of being like, I mean, one can more or less trace where they're coming from, but maybe you have a more specific view about where they're coming from, where is the vocabulary you're picking up in relation especially with Mexican sculpture.
Yes, well, I am always negotiating between the ancient Mexico and the kind of between the first half and the second half of Mexican sculpture in the 20th century, because, for instance, in the first half we had like a kind of what people know as the Mexican Renaissance, this kind of a modern artists that go into ancient art and find their kind of renewal and a way to liberate themselves from the canon of academicism in 19th century, etc. And then in the second half, you have like a kind of almost rejection of that search for identity, and then a desire for a universal or cosmopolitan art. So
we were talking about precisely, Pedro, the Cuevas, Cortina de Nopal, no? I mean, the very famous statement of José Luis Cueva.
Yes, which, he and other artists would say, like, we don't want to continue painting revolutionary themes and that. So, I probably start working in the 90s, where we were very, very far from this classical, I'm showing this because, these sculptures that we just saw are connected with the subject of libraries. But I think that is like this idea of sculpture as a sort of like way to establish a national identity is what happens in the first half of the century, and then a big rejection of that. And I think of it as thesis, antithesis. And in the 21st century, I think that is what I'm doing is almost like a synthesis of those two, because I'm certainly very much interested in this renewal of modern vocabulary that happens with this search for the legacy of the art from the ancient civilizations in Mexico, no? Mm-hmm. These are also in the show, which are these Amate papers. For me, this is a sort. The Amate was a paper that was done since before the conquest with the bark of a tree, and these are kind of exclamation marks. In Spanish, you have exclamation marks upside down at the beginning of a phrase. So it's a sort of concrete poem, so to speak, no, with these exclamation marks.
Beautiful. Beautiful. But tell us a little bit about the imagery that is in it, the iconography that you have there, and why.
Yeah,
it looks like a concrete poetry.
Yeah, there's a lot of elements that come from the idea of language, and in the previous sculptures you had seen kind of a figure holding a book or a figure writing. I'm interested in the Humean figure and how to reintroduce it in the realm of sculpture, not in a kind of a kind of a realistic way, but a stylized way. And like these drawings connect with some sculptures like these ones, for instance, like on the left, this is a semicolon, not like intersection of a dot and a comma. Or in the right, there's again the subject of the exclamation marks that are up and down. So, like sometimes I would like take elements from typography and turn them into three-dimensional objects that, like inform this sculpture practice, because I find them a kind of allusions or allegories to like to speech, vocabulary, etc. And sometimes they're kind of from this, from the kind of Arabic or Western kind of signs and that we use for writing, but sometimes I've been using also elements that come from the way that the ancient codexes were written, because in ancient Mexico there was no division between painters and writers, because the codexes were written with pictograms. So, for instance, like a speech bubble was represented with a tlatoli, which is this kind of virgule that is like a kind of a circle that maybe we will see in the next slide. That are I had used speech bubbles before, but I discovered that there were many different ways to kind of represent speech bubbles, like the ones that I've been drawing in these works. Like, for instance, the one below, when you have this kind of a virgule in the bottom that has these kind of spikes, that means that this is not only speech, but it's like singing or poetry. No, it's a symbol for poetry. And it's just interesting because these are ubiquitous in kind of a Mexican mid-century graphic design, and to the present, there has been kind of many generations who have kind of continued to use these So they're kind of very part. I mean, like they're ancient, but they're also very omnipresent in modernity, no?
Let me ask you a little bit about, I mean, you talk a little bit about the material of the paper, you know, and that it was used before, you know, in ancient Mexico. What were you, can you tell us a little bit about the use of, and why you choose stone and that particular type of working stone, which you are now, I think, you know, you work in a, or you've always worked in a very, very incredible way, you know. Why the stone? What connects you? What is the materiality connecting to what exactly? You know, I mean, it would be wonderful to, if you could expand on that.
Well, I was feeling a calling to work in stone, which at first I didn't understood, you know, like I thought that it was a nostalgic thing, and then, you know, like the thing about stone carving is that it has been an unfashionable technique for several centuries already. You know, like the sculptors that were working with stone carving 100 years ago were already kind of bringing back something that was already discarded or forgotten. No, like the stone carving around the world has disappeared mostly, and nowadays when it's done, it's mostly done by robots. But I don't know, there's something that when you work in stone, I like that I have like this kind of odd superstition that I believe that a piece that has been carved in stone earns its place in eternity, and that, you know, regardless, even if you don't know who made it, it will be kind of kept around by others, because there's so much work that goes into the carving that I don't know, like it's all a stone carving is always a unique piece. It's not like casting where you can have a mold and then you cast several times over the same piece. Like the carving is a very primitive way, and in a way, you know, like the same as Noguchi would say, or other artists would say, like his teacher who was Brancusi, you know, like this idea of a sort of mystery that there is to the form and the slow process of arriving there, which is thinking by making. No, you know, like a lot of times I don't have much explanation for some of the works. And that's, for instance, like, well, you know, this one, for instance, that we're seeing is a chacmol, which is a kind of a very constant theme in Mexican art. It's a sort of reclined figure, but in a way, it's like I'm taking it to an abstract vocabulary, where it's a kind of a geometric semicircle, but also hopes to be a reclined figure. No? So, you know, this is a kind of I'm interested in this, in how, as opposed to my social sculptures, where I do performance and participation and theater, working in sculpture is, you know, like a discrete entity where I face other kinds of problems like composition and the physical resolution of the work, which don't need me by their side. When they are finished, they exist in the world, and that's very liberating, I feel. So, but there's also this idea that the studio, because stone carving also has to be done with the help of others, you know, like is something that since Egypt or medieval times, stone is a team effort, and the studio, I've been very much interested in keeping the trade of stone carving alive, and the studio becoming a sort of school where I identified the stone carvers that were left in the city, and I first would like go and learn with them, but then, you know, like some of them joined the studio and are training a new generation that starts up as apprentices, but then 3 years later they have become masters themselves. So the idea of of the practice is that also is a way to keep this kind of craftsmanship going. So that's something that I'm very interested in this very kind of old-fashioned way of working of the studio as a sort of like a kind of intergenerational transmission of knowledge.
Wonderful. And I mean, it's very interesting to see how, I mean, your space, your own, I mean, your studio to some way, and also we have seen, I don't know if people know here, but I just want to disclose that when Pedro talked about the library and the connection with the library and the works of art, that was his own house, who serves as a public library. Your private space is transformed into a public library. Can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe we can see that image, Chloe, the one of the, yeah.
Yes, or you know, we have 30,000 volumes in the library and a community of nearly 500 regular users. So every day someone rings our bell and comes and takes books and then returns them 2 or 3 months later. And it's, you know, it's just like a kind of experiment, a social experiment in direct action with this idea of that there's obviously, like, especially in art or film or culture, etc., a lot of books have never made its way to the internet, and most of them are out of print, etc. So it's very important to have this lending system for libraries, which unfortunately in Mexico, libraries are very protective of their collections, and it's not that easy to have to borrow books from libraries. And out of desperation from this phenomenon, I decided to start our own public library. And it's been 4 years since it's working, and it's strange because it's, you know, like it's a domestic space where we live, but it has become a sort of public space because, you know, like all the people that comes every day, and the intention is not to read the books in the space. You know, like I believe that that you read the book in bed, in the toilet, in the bus, you know, like you decide where, but you know, like it's very important to take the book with you. So we think that a library that does not lend is not a library; it's a jail for books. And so we, with the initiative, we have been pushing for other libraries to open up. Museum libraries, for instance, like we activated recently the library of the Carrillo Hill Museum, where we also created an art lending library that you can borrow also works of art and records and many different things. And it's trying to push, you know, there's so many institutions that have libraries, but that do not lend. So that's kind of the idea of trying to create as much circulation as possible of physical objects, of physical books.
Mm-hmm. But that segues quite nicely into, I think, the two aspects of your work. I mean, in some way you have the formal sculpture, put it that way, you know, whatever you are doing in the studio, and also the social sculpture that, you know, that you have been working on. I mean, this to some degree is, you know, opening your own private space into a public library, and also transforming to some degree to a level, in a way, society, trying to do something there. Can we talk then, maybe move from these sculptures to the video that will put us into the conversation about the social sculpture, you know, because we have been doing other projects last year, this year, and one has to do specifically with, of course, the notion of disarmament that you have been working on for almost a decade already. But in the last iteration, you have been saying like the nuclear disarmament. You know, so maybe we can see what you did at Site Santa Fe not long ago. Yes, go ahead, Pedro.
This is, yes, you know, like I had a show earlier this year in March in Santa Fe, New Mexico at Site. And there, you know, like New Mexico, as many other states in the United States, are very much affected by gun violence. And I've been working constantly since, you know, like maybe 2005 or 2007, turning weapons into shovels to plant trees, or turning weapons into instruments. So I met a woman called Miranda Viscoli, who directs an initiative called New Mexicans for Gun Violence Prevention. And she had replicated the Palas por Pistolas, which is this project that I did where I turned guns into, there she is, you know, where I turned guns into shovels to plant trees. So, you know, I was very happy that she had replicated my project, and I wanted to do a collaboration with this organization. So what we did was to create a workshop for teenagers, and these teenagers do something that is a sort of flower vase, where shotguns and rifles and guns are turned into these flower bases. And the way it works is that they have a gun buyback program, the New Mexicans for Gun Violence Prevention. So what they do is that these flower bases that the kids are doing are were made available at the museum store for $1,500. And 100% of the proceeds go to gift cards that are so, you know, like with the sale of one base, you could get 10 gift cards of $150, which is the exchange for a handgun. So, you know, like they do these gun buybacks. You bring a handgun and they give you a gift card for $150. So effectively, the sale of each of these pieces was removing 10 guns from the streets. And it, you know, it was actually something quite dramatic that two of these kids, that when they started the workshop, you know, just because of the neighborhood they live in, actually from 8 of these kids, 2 kids, you know, were shot in their neighborhoods before we had managed to finish the workshop, just because, you know, like they are in this kind of a epidemic of gun violence. So, you know, like it really became something that even made these efforts more meaningful, in the sense that, you know, like that the kids really feel that they are doing this, again, kind of direct action into creating a circle where the production of these pieces is kind of creating not a symbolic but a real a reduction of guns. So that it's designed to somehow become a permanent initiative that allows them to do this. And then this is another project, which was...
Now we're moving into the nuclear disarmament, is that correct?
Yes. Also, on occasion of this show at Site Santa Fe, I made a film with the Downwinders in New Mexico, which are communities that have been affected by radiation. Sometimes the radiation was due to the nuclear tests that were happening in Nevada, in Utah, and in all these areas. Like now there's the film Oppenheimer, so everybody was reminded of the Trinity tests. But but this has continued to happen, not necessarily because of nuclear tests, because they were banned in 1992, only 30 years ago, but because of the uranium mining and also the nuclear waste that they're fighting for. There's a problem where there's over 100 plus nuclear power plants in the United States. And nobody wants to take the nuclear waste. They're holding on to their nuclear waste, but to move that nuclear waste to a safe, in quotation marks, a place, you have to move that by train. So no state wants that nuclear waste to go through your rail tracks. So it's a dilemma that has not found a solution, because once you become acquainted with the effects that radiation have, like such as the downwinders who have been affected by radioactive cancers for decades, they are fighting because in Nevada, they wanted to create like a kind of they make a kind of a container facility inside a place called Yucca Mountain. Mm-hmm. And they rejected it, and now they wanted to bring it to southern New Mexico. And I was, this short film are a collection of voices from activists, some of them from the Navajo Nation, and some of them from Acoma, which is another First Nation in New Mexico, that are fighting against this nuclear waste storage facility that they want to build in their territory. So, there's something that is, for instance, like the United States alone is spending now $1.7 trillion in renewing its nuclear arsenal. And that's why all this uranium mining is now, there's a push for new uranium mining. And also there's like this kind of idea that nuclear energy is clean. But it's only clean in the sense that when you're producing the nuclear energy, you're not doing carbon emissions, but you don't take into account that to do the mining for the nuclear fuel, which is uranium, you have to use fossil fuels and a lot of water. So, when they are doing the uranium mining, they pollute these aquifers with radioactivity. And these are places that have no water, a lot of places like in Arizona, etc. You see entire cities that are going dry. So it's not a time to be mining uranium, especially for making nuclear bombs. So this is a story that is not so much in people's attention now. I think that actually there's like a big push for nuclear energy without taking into account the humanitarian effects that this industry has. So there's a kind of a very close connection between nuclear energy and nuclear weapons that because they're kind of run by the same corporations in the supply of all these kind of radioactive materials. And there's, there was like a big kind of a cultural rejection against nuclear energy and against nuclear weapons in the 80s. Okay. But I believe that there's a big amnesia that where we have actually lost our capacity to talk about the issue because no one is acquainted with it, yeah.
So then, but maybe you can talk a little bit about, Pedro, about the role that Mexico had historically, because I think this, if you're going back on your formal sculptor to vocabulary, of, like, Mexican public art to some degree. Also, you are picking up on a historical role that Mexico had on the non-proliferation of these weapons. Maybe you can discuss this a little bit, and then maybe we can enter to see what exactly you have been doing in order to transform yourself into some sort of a platform for other artists to show and to adhere to particular campaigns of non-proliferation.
Yes, of course. Like in 1967, Mexico, a Mexican diplomat called Alfonso Garcia Robles went to persuade all the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean to create the first nuclear weapon-free region in the planet. No, so 33 countries created endorsed the Tlatelolco Treaty, which because this is kind of immediately after the Cuban Missile Crisis. Well, not immediately, but like the Cuban Missile Crisis is in '62. Mm-hmm. So that was an example of the Russians trying to deploy missiles in Cuba, but the same was, like a kind of could have happened with other countries where either the United States or the Soviet Union were trying to get some of these countries to have intercontinental ballistic missiles located there. And so Mexico kind of talked to all Latin America to prevent this from happening. And we created like the first nuclear-free zone. And this is, this story has been kind of eclipsed or kind of forgotten, because this was in 1967 at the Tlatelolco building, which 1 year later was in the same place where there was the students' massacre that happened in '68. So now people associate Tlatelolco with the students' massacre, but the real, like the first meaning of this square was where the treaty was signed. But that treaty, the Tlatelolco Treaty, became the blueprint for the Rarotonga Treaty that prohibited nuclear tests in the Pacific, and then the Olinalava Treaty where all Africa created also a nuclear-free zone. So most progress towards nuclear disarmament has been done by the global South. Because you cannot expect for leadership on disarmament to come from the countries that have nuclear weapons, because the mentality is very different. For instance, even anti-nuclear movements or organizations in the United States are often not abolitionists. A lot of them advocate for arms reduction or non-proliferation, but not for a nuclear ban on nuclear weapons. And I think that the organizations that I'm working with are more kind of, we have seen that non-proliferation or kind of or risk reduction or etc. have not really worked. We are now, according to the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, the closest that we have ever been to a nuclear conflict is now, and it's like the paradox of this is like in the kind of blind spot of human consciousness, there's no outrage or no concern because the Cold War or the assumption that the Cold War was over, which was after the fall of the Berlin Wall, was one of the factors where people don't have this in their minds. Another factor is that nuclear tests stopped happening in 92. So we have not seen nuclear explosions happening. You know, if there were nuclear detonations today, like the 5,000 plus that happened in the 50s and 60s and 70s, people would be with their phones taping the mushroom cloud, and there would be kind of outrage in social media, etc. So this has kind of this effect of out of sight, out of mind, no? And then also the fact that that all these movies and songs, etc., that were done in the 80s, you know, like there was like this big sense of relief in the 90s that this kind of threat was somehow over, but it really never went away. It's so now, because for instance, the last nuclear missile that had entered the U.S. arsenal was in 91. 30 years after, all that arsenal is obsolete, and that's why these $1.7 trillion are being spent today in renewing the entire nuclear arsenal. And the same is happening with all the other countries: Russia, China, France, the UK, India, Pakistan, Israel. The 9 countries that have nuclear weapons are spending all their money that could be very well spent in creating clean energy or any other thing regarding climate change. We're spending all that money on nuclear weapons. So it's that the temptation, you know, now a nuclear weapon can be the size of this cup. You know, like you can deploy a nuclear weapon in very easily because there's this kind of a new technology. So there's a very, very high temptation to use them.
Pedro, I have a question for you that, you know, that, I mean, you talk about the out of sight, out of mind. How does and that is probably one of the most complicated issues about this issue of nuclear contamination or pollution, because you cannot see it, quote unquote. How does a sculptor or a visual artist, you know, deal with this particular problem, you know, with the issue of the invisibility, quote unquote, of the radiation and of the threat? You know, how does a visual artist, I mean, you are someone who works in visual arts and a sculpture, you know, addresses that complication?
Well, you know, like to answer that question, maybe I would like to show this website that we're working on. Let me put it on, because, you know, like I have found that much more than that what one artist can do. There are so many artists that have done this in the past, no? And what we're doing with ICANN, the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, is doing this exhibition called Artists Against the Bomb, which is a collection of posters that show works from different decades, as well as kind of newly commissioned work. For instance, this is Magdalena Bakanovitz, who made this tower that was intended for Hiroshima. It's an unrealized project. For instance, here's Thomas Hirschhorn, who just made this poster. Monica Bombicini has this poster that says, "My body became oppressed into a column," which is a reference to the Hiroshima shadows that were kind of this projection of that were kind of from the flash from the atomic explosion. And what we're doing is to source works that have been done about the issue of nuclear weapons, as well as asking artists to do new posters. For instance, like this is the contribution from the Guerrilla Girls, and with a lot of humor on it. And the idea is that this is an exhibition that we will present next in New York in November 27, in 2 locations. One is at the United Nations building, and the other is at the Job Space in Soho. and what is it is, you know, like a kind of posters that will that, you know, that reflect on this issue. For instance, just to put an example, this is a poster where Mónica de la Torre and together with Alex Valgue wrote the countries that have nuclear weapons, and this is a sort of disarmament, or kind of like removing in alphabetical order the letters to sort of somehow like kind of create this allegory of disarmament. No, there's, for instance, like historical work like Noguchi, who made this project for the atomic death. So, you know, like what we're trying to do is a sort of art history of artists that have dealt with this issue, in order to bring as much angles that there can be as to the issue. A lot of people, for instance, like don't know that what we know as a peace symbol is really originally the symbol for the campaign for nuclear disarmament. So, you know, like you have like the language of semaphore with flags, the letter N and the letter D overlapped for nuclear disarmament, is how the nuclear disarmament symbol was. Later, it became like known as a peace symbol, but it was really like the nuclear disarmament symbol. So this is, for instance, like a poster from the 70s, and this is, you know, like the idea is to try to make a sort of chain reaction, in the sense that when we're inviting one artist, that artist has to nominate another artist. And in that way, all artists are also curators of the project, but also the idea is to exponentially grow the basis of voices that are kind of joining the project, and also to show how much thought had been in the past to this. Because, for instance, like, I don't know, for instance, Mariana Jampolsky, who made this poster already in 1958, for instance, that was, you know, like a 60 years ago almost. So, or more. So I think that this is not a new thing, you know, like but somehow it is today, this paradox, no? As much as it should be in the top of our priorities, is very much something that we're trying to bring back and resuscitate this kind of a big amount of thought that has gone into this kind of a plethora of voices that you know, like that in the style of, you know, like the poster campaigns for solidarity that have been organized in the past for different causes, no?
So, I mean, so can you show a little bit how they are like actually display these posters?
Sure. So, for instance, like the idea is that the posters, for instance, this was like in the meeting of state parties from the nuclear ban treaty in Vienna. You know, like the idea of the posters is that they are always black and white. There are PDFs that you can download. So, you know, like this is an exhibition that you can put up without involving shipping or insurance. So, you know, like the idea is that this is a kind of exhibition that can be replicated in different places at the same time. For instance, this was also in New Mexico. We made these billboards. We have been testing in other cultural environments different to museums, such as rock concerts, where you have like a kind of a festival with a captive audience. So, for instance, this was in a festival that has 70,000 attendants, so everybody saw it. And then there's like this idea that we want to reach audiences which perhaps have not been kind of familiar with the issue of nuclear weapons, because as you know, again, if you were born in the 90s, it's very rare that you have heard about this issue. You know, like is something that is mostly you know, like mostly boomers and Generation X that are very much aware of it, because we grew up in this kind of a sort of
fear, I guess.
Fear, but yeah, like we're now putting together a book which you know, like we plan to release and hopefully make more noise about it. But you know, like it's just like a kind of a sort of, again, finding those spaces between art and activism that you know, like, because obviously the organization that is doing this, the treaty, what it means that you do when you do a treaty on prohibition of nuclear weapons, as a country, you can subscribe to the treaty. So there's 95 countries that have endorsed the treaty. So half of the world has said we will not have nuclear weapons. But that's a kind of obligation that you put upon yourself as a country. So half the world has banned nuclear weapons, and by international law, nuclear weapons are now illegal. That doesn't mean that the countries that have nuclear weapons will get rid of them, but slowly more countries are joining. So this is the only remaining treaty that exists, because the Non-Proliferation Treaty expired and the other treaties have expired. So now, for instance, like Russia and the United States cannot check on their arsenals as they used to be a year ago. You know, like now you can do whatever you want, because there's not any kind of remaining instrument to check whether you're developing this or not. And it's kind of a paradox, because if we were talking about like biological weapons or chemical weapons or landmines, which are very bad, but not nearly as harmful as a nuclear weapon, you know, like this would be an outrage. But you know, like it's just like a kind of a very abstract subject. So that's when artists, I believe, that can be of help, because you know, like the organizations are busy doing the diplomatic work to get the endorsement of other countries, but artists are the one that can visualize. And historically, it was like the films from the 80s, like The Day After and all these movies, Dr. Strangelove in the 60s, or many movies that were made about nuclear war, that were the ones that had put this issue in people's minds. But because no more artwork has been done since or very few ones have been made in the last 30 years, also the kind of cultural awareness about the issue has somehow been replaced by other concerns, no? Like, I mean, like, or most of the activism in the last 30 years has been around identity, race, gender, the environment, etc. But you know, like but this issue also is in urgent need of attention.
I wanted to ask you one last question that maybe I think all of us are thinking, which is, how do you handle, or how do you manage these two aspects of your work? I mean, you seem to be an incredible social sculptor as well as a formal sculptor. You know, how are these two things floating in your own practice? I mean, one leads to the other, I guess, you know, in the way that we saw, for example, the sculptures in the public private space as your bookstore, as your library, you know, or in your library, or how do you manage these two aspects?
Well, you know, like I think that, you know, there's a difference between pieces and projects, no? I mean, like when you do a project, you never know the kind of how much it may expand or where are the exact limits, and it's something that has to be kind of alive, because you you have all this kind of a social sculpture with something that precisely its kind of construction is like the kind of input from a group, no, that is engaged in this participation process, whereas the sculpture is more like this kind of discrete entity, which is a piece that will then, you know, like continue to exist without you needing to be make constant care of for it. So, and also, I mean, like the producing pieces that can find a place in the market finances these other projects where often, you know, like you know, cannot have a commercial viability, no? So, you know, like at least in terms of the very real day-to-day kind of operations of the studio, the sculpture practice finances the other more social sculptures, no, that are like the library or the films or the disarmament projects, but also, you know, like sometimes these kind of undertakings, for instance, like the idea of the treaty, the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. What I find interesting is that most progress have been done by very small countries that you may feel that they don't have like that they're not big players in the global scene, but you know, like that doesn't mean that these people are less important. You know, like I think that actually it's very telling that leadership sometimes cannot be expected by the superpowers because, you know, like they have these toys that are the kind of that put all the planet at risk, and there's a kind of a cognitive kind of resistance to letting go of them. So so I believe that for instance, like when I made this sculpture of two hands holding like this, which is called the treaty, for me it means like this kind of you know, sometimes these social projects may give me the narrative that then I want to translate into an allegory or physical sculpture. So, you know, they you know, the sculpture may provide resources for running the social sculptures, and the social sculptures will provide the narrative for the physical sculptures. So that's a little bit like you know, it's not necessarily evident that this is you know, sometimes you know, is not necessarily in the surface, but certainly is kind of is connected from inside.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we're actually going to end with that because this is the end. This is the end of our conversation, of our part of the conversation. And then we open up to questions. Maybe we can, you can stop sharing, Pedro, and then we can, we would love to hear questions. And I know Chloe and Eleanor are going to take it from here.
Yeah, thank you so much for that amazing conversation, Pedro and Jose. That was really, really lovely. And it was great to hear so many details about the current projects. The first question is going to be from GE. GE, I'm going to give you a chance to unmute to ask.
Thank you so very much, Chloe. And thank you, Pedro, and thank you, Jose. The question is, do you believe your creation is a kind of, I said initially spiritual, but I'm thinking spiritual political combat because it requires so many constant decisions and a process that often works against one of the primary maxims of art, the severance of the artwork from the author?
The severance of what?
the severance of the artwork from the author, from the sculptor from the sculpture.
Well, I mean, like you're asking about like where there. I think of the work as spiritual. Is that
spiritual and political? Probably both. Is inseparable. Yes.
Yes. Well, that's a lot of art, especially for instance, like in my generation, we would like often like start by thinking and then doing, right? But I think that one of the kind of things that I have with time kind of try to resort more is in doing first and theorizing after, in the sense that that oftentimes you have to launch yourself into doing without knowing very well what you're doing, and that I think that maybe is spiritual, if you wanted to call, but it's guys, because when you want to say that you hope for art to have a soul, to have a heart, and that happens when you somehow do first and then theorize after, because you're guided by a certain intuition, and oftentimes material takes shapes by itself. So it's maybe that's my kind of esoteric view on the process, not like that it has to be guided by this hands-on intuition.
Thank you
so very much. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question, GE. That was an amazing question. And thank you for that very lovely answer, Pedro. The next question is going to be from Eleanor on the Brooklyn Rail team. I'll pass it over to Eleanor.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chloe. And thank you so much, Jose and Pedro, for this amazing conversation. Your work is incredible. I'm wondering how you think your studies or history and architecture has impacted your projects or your artistic approaches to your work.
Well, it's curious because like in architecture you have to solve a problem, and you have a program, and the design has to fulfill the needs of that program, and I think that created a sort of a bias in myself. It's not necessarily a negative bias, but it can be, in the sense that I had often hoped for art to serve a function, to offer a solution, and that is something that has kind of I don't know. I think that artists don't break rules. Often people say like artists break rules, but I think that is quite the opposite. I think that artists add extra rules upon themselves. They need to, and one of the rules, sometimes I ask myself, or I impose myself the rule of have some of these artworks or projects to kind of respond to a problem in some way, in a somehow accountable way. This is an issue that Jose and myself and Professor Doris Sommer from Harvard University at the Cultural Agents Initiative have discussed much about where their art can be accountable for change or not. And the idea is that, sometimes if you build into the project like some kind of instrument or mechanism that can be accountable, it can be done. For instance, like when I'm saying about these flower vases that then are sold, and that the sale of each of these vases takes out 10 guns from the street, that is a sort of accountability mechanism embedded on the piece. But also in the same way, so this is something that kind of my architect kind of a formation, somehow like wanting art to play this role. But at the same time, I have struggled a lot to move away or beyond this demand and letting art be art and only being art for art's sake, which also, art is the food for the soul. So its uselessness is very much his own use, not like kind of also, if we were only to hear protest music, it would be depressing, no?
Yeah.
I love that answer. Thank you so much, Pedro. And thank you for that question, Eleanor. I'll ask the next question. My question is, especially in consideration of your typographical sculptures, how does translation, if at all, become an aspect of your practice, Pedro? And how do you think of language as a sculpture in and of itself?
Well, language is very interesting because every language has its, well, not every language, but if you change from one language to other, you will often find with different alphabets and different, and within each alphabet, there's like a whole universe of typographies that have definitely like a very compelling design a universe. So I for instance, like recently I was doing a series of paintings that was the phrase zero nuclear weapons in different languages, and how the zero was translated into different languages, and the same word that I was trying to translate this, and I did the kind of translations into two different languages, 200 different languages. There's thousands of languages, but at least I tried, like languages that some are kind of like Esperanto or Lithuanian or Thai or there's Arabic, etc. So it's very interesting to see how every language has one way to like a particular grammar, and how like some languages put like some adjective first and after the subject, etc. So I think that is in general, I think that is fascinating, just to the plasticity that language has in itself, no? And symbols, etc., are always. I think that for people who feels good in the proximity of books, etc., we will always have like this fascination with typography and kind of a book design, etc. So, I often go back to this at least in a kind of it's not that I may go very, very deep, but I deep into these different languages. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thanks for answering my question. The last question today is going to be from Fong at the Rail. Fong, I'll give you the chance to unmute.
Thank you. Thank you, Chloe. Hi, Jose. Hi, Pedro. Good to see you. Sorry, I was in the meeting, so I didn't hear the whole entire conversation, but I will this weekend. But we have, you and I have spoke before about your effort against nuclear, bomb and whatnot. Remind me so much of the late 70s in New York City when the Art Workers Coalition was created. And that was very important, that it would bring not just artists, but all the creative communities, filmmakers, writers, critics, and whatnot. And then it opened up the women artists in revolution also in the same year. And one thing that they were very insistent on was that they should never talk about their own work as artists, but come together as a common cause, someone like you who have a practice as an artist, and then the commitment, this political commitment, political activism, and to do both simultaneously is not an easy task. So my question is very practical one, because I remember Robert Graves, one was asked how he managed to publish all these famous historical novels like I, Claudius and others. And then he was maintaining his practice as a poet very rigorously. And his answer was, I breed my fancy dogs in order to feed my cats. So I'm asking the same as your similarly to activities, Pedro. How do you keep it up? What is your day look like? Because I also do a lot of different things. It's very rigid, my schedule. So I wonder what your schedule look like.
Yeah, no, that's it. I also ask myself that question of how do you do it, Funk? Because you are also a kind of always, like creating so much output, like and the example of being in the 800 something Zoom today, it's already one of those very impressive beyond belief. But I think that like the idea of I mean, I think that in the studio we are working in a very kind of you could call it vertical operation, or in the sense that that oftentimes what I do is that I am going around checking on all the things that we're doing, having kind of a 5 seconds meeting every half hour, or something like that. So it's like jumping from one next to the other, kind of checking on things, and so it's one could say that it's like a sort of micromanaging, which some people think is bad, but I think that is a way to just like keep pushing for a lot of these parallel projects to move forward, because sometimes you don't even have time to plan. You just go and do things, and then try to just like by working nonstop, they start to take shape.
Got it.
I mean, it's not. I don't know if that is a good advice or kind of something that could be. But I do this. We're editing videos, so I'm 2 minutes watching how the video is going, and then I go and we're checking on the design of a book, and I do these rounds, and then I'm drawing or playing with clay at the same time while answering emails. It's all at the same time, non-stop.
Well, maybe that's the key, non-stop. Yeah. I don't know how to shut it off. And I've been doing it for 22 years plus years now. And the key is that I love it. So I think you do too. So
very much.
I guess that's the key word. When you love what you do, every day is a vacation. So, well, thank you so much for that answer.
Thank you. I relate to what you say.
Thanks.
Oh, good. Jose, agree on that one?
I am still on vacation. I've never had a day in my life working. So clearly then.
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you, Jose. Back to you, Chloe.
Thank you so much for that question, Pong. And thank you so much again to Pedro and to Jose for this amazing conversation today. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading. And it's my absolute pleasure to welcome our Poet Laureate of the Day, Pierre Joris, to the stage. Pierre Joris has moved between Europe, the US, and North Africa for 55 years, publishing over 80 books of poetry, essays, translations, and anthologies, most recently Interglacial Narrows and Always the Many, Never the One, Conversations in Between with Florent Toniello, both from Contramundum Press. And with that, I will pass it over to Pierre. Pierre, welcome. Thank you so much for reading today.
So I'll read from Interglacial Narrows. Okay. I'll start with a poem from my old friend Anselm Hollow. There's a pitch to get the new book of his. Many. You hear me, right?
Yes, we do hear you. There's a bit of sound behind you.
No, there's some noise there.
Okay, yeah, but we can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Elegy for Anselm Hollow. 1. Eyes, eyes, eyes. Invisible the eyes. 1,000 crows on the snow, and yet 2 crows already make a crowd. 2. And yet we have to travel, Anselm, because there are wines that don't. 3. Ich trinke aus 2 Gläsern, as we both suck on at the Royal Caesura, the wandering eyes in the crow's nest, between poem and translation, translation and poem, bringing it all back home. In praise of aging.
What's the math? Hold on a second, guys.
The older you get, the taller you get. As you stand on the shoulders of your accumulating years, you see farther each passing year. Just don't turn around. Don't try to watch your ass, your downfall.
I'm sorry, I apologize. Yeah, I'm sorry, I apologize.
The poet's job. Pick up everything that shines. Discard the gold. Keep the light. Trigonometry of the Trinity. And the Lord, having rested from his labors, sat up, looked around, and seeing how his critters had fucked up his creation, he raised his hand and put a bullet through his head. Thus, the 3rd eye was born. Purgatory is forever, because the Barzakh is all there is. Paradise and hell, but momentary passages. The holes, in fact, that fit the sprockets of the daily in Fegefeuer's link chains. Guano apoptosis. Before the ghost cargo appeared, you pointed wordlessly, smiling, 2 fingers in V shape. I looked at, then thinking better of it, looked through it, or the shape they made, as if an aim-taking device, and saw 1 quick black thin streak that turned into 2, just above the water. You and me, you said, I am the one up front. You added, yes, I joked, you are, but I'll beat you to it at the post. Those were the first 2 cormorants of July. There would be 1 more higher up, 2 more going south, and then coming back, 3 sitting on the water and diving. One of them, the middle one, bringing up a good-sized fish and swallowing it, and us thinking and you saying, wow, that was a big fish indeed. And I adding, look how it drinks water now to help wash it down. And you, as we walked on, wondered exactly how, and differently from other animal processes, the cormorants broke down those fish, arrived unchewed and whole in their stomachs to produce that major guano that Famiglia is rightly famous for. And you surmised that maybe the fish lend a hand, a fin, by somehow helping advance their own decomposition, which puzzled me a bit, but then I thought of Michel Serres' word, apoptosis, the small death, elementary suicide of self organ and organism. From the name the Greeks gave the fall of leaves in autumn, a fourth death, a word I gave you when we got home, and which you are now working with in the context of the essay on the colonization of the island of Alcatraz and other confused bird matter, which I try here now just to get the facts of the morning walk down in these no longer so equal length lines, in the hope that on reading I can clarify them, as one says of butter, into yet another cormorant celebration. How are we doing time-wise? Can I have one more or?
One more, go for it.
Okay. The dream of the desert in the book. 1. The book lies open in all the hallways, in all the oases, in all the dreams, around every corner, behind every sand dune. In this dream too, you have to add a line. Your place is between the already written and the unwritten, in the white empty space. In this dream, Stalin smiled and Heidegger too. In this dream, cockroaches scuttled from the book, but it had to be written in, despite the smiles. A dream of a book, a dream of a desert in a book, a dream of a desert that runs from the book, a dream of a book and the desert, a dream of a desert in a book, a dream of sand through fingers, a dream of white, a dream of mica, a dream of phoenix, a dream of desert spilling from the book into and through the hallways and out the door. And the voice said, write in the book and you will be healed. A voice said, my middle, my voice, my will, write in the book, write the desert, the dream, write the sand, the white, write the running, dream the book. A dream of Stalin, a dream of Celan, a dream of parents, a dream of houses. In the first house, Celan hides in a closet and Stalin bangs his big boots and storms over the wooden floor. In the second house, Celan escapes through the back window and Stalin screams and tears at his mustaches. In the third house, we are not. It is full to overflowing with all the parents, everybody's parents, Celan's and Stalin's and mine too. In the fourth house, there is a city in ruins. A moon stands above it. It is white. It is full. It has jebels and wadis on it. It is pouring with sand. Thank you.
Pierre, thank you so much. I'm so pleased that technology worked out for us in the end. That was brilliant.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry for.
And thank you to Pedro again. And thank you to Jose. Thank you as well to Victoria and the team at Listen, who were so helpful in preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank, of course, the Terra Foundation for American Art, who sponsor our NSE program and who make daily conversations like this one possible. They also support our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. For 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our free monthly publication and public events like this one, our daily NSE. You can check the chat for a link to donate to support the Rail. And if you're free on Monday at 1 p.m., join us for a conversation with Stephen Shore and Jason Rosenfeld, celebrating 50 years since Stephen Shore's iconic and generative 1973 road trip across America. We'll conclude with a poetry reading by Charles North. And with that, you can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope the rest of your Friday is just as inspiring.
Gracias. Ciao.
Thank you so much,
you,
everyone.
Pedro.
So lovely to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pierre.
Thank you, Pierre. Finally come
Thank you so
through.
much.
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you, Jose.
Joanna,
Thank you, Jose.
Jose,
So brilliant.
Thank you, Pedro.
And if you
Take
find
care.
yourself in
Thank
LA, go
you.
see the show.
Yes, congratulations on the show.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Go see the show.
Have a wonderful weekend, you all.